Obviously, the manufacturer would have to say one way or the other, but I've never seen one of those that didn't require the J bracket to come in this way. You know, in other words,
the J bracket came down, but some of the top panels have a lip on them.
Right.
The metal security sticker.
Yep.
I've seen them actually, the J bar come underneath and attach to that rather than to the door panel itself.
Yeah, that sounds.
And they're just about cracked every time.
Yeah, it's too much stress.
Those seem a little U-shaped clip on the top. J bar fits in there, and pin goes into them. See them on the top of the door. See them in the top rail.
Right. If it's what the door is designed, if it's the way the door is designed to be attached to, then that's fine. But most of the doors, that stiffener is going to be on the flat side of the panel. Yeah, Carl.
One of the main things I look for is actually, before I do the lip test, stop test, is the bracket itself. If you see any dent or dent where
Yep.
it's connected, they're good.
Yep. If that attachment point's damaged, then I'm done. Bad things, especially if you stress test it with a damaged connection point, then there's a good chance you're going to be buying somebody a door, because they're not going to understand that it failed during testing.
Failed during course.
Yeah, that's I tell people. Home inspectors don't break anything; it just failed during testing. So, but anyway, that's garage doors. We're going to do appliances right now, and so let's get going. All right. So learning objectives, ASHI and CREIA standards of practice, limitations, suggestions, general information. We're going to go through ranges, electric, gas, propane, LP, and any induction cooktops. Cooktops, same thing. Exhaust fans. Yes, sir.
Carl's not doing his job. He didn't remind you to put your video on.
Okay, I know. Well, I did it as I was telling him to remind me.
I'm backing up
So,
Carl.
okay, all right. I appreciate that. Anytime you can throw Carl under the bus, do not miss the opportunity. Okay, so garbage disposals, dishwashers, microwaves, and then refrigerators, wine storage units, washers, dryers, and specialty appliances like warming drawers, filtration systems, point-of-use hot water systems, and whatnot. We're going to kind of run through this pretty quickly because we're a little actually behind because I had the video problem we were dealing with. Again, this is my opinions, not meant to expand the standards in any way, shape, or form. Feel free to ignore me. Like I said, my wife does on a daily, multiple times per day basis. ASHI standards, inspectors shall inspect installed ovens, ranges, surface cooking appliances, microwaves, dishwashing machines, food waste grinders by using normal operating controls to activate the primary function. The inspector is not required to inspect appliance thermostats, including their calibration, adequacy of heating elements, self-cleaning oven cycles, indicator lights, door seals, timers, clocks, time features, and other specialized features of the appliance. Operate or confirm the operation of every control and or feature of an inspected appliance. So that's the ASHI standards. Pretty comprehensive because Bruce Barker and Mark Kramer were the ones that were involved in this stuff, and they're very anal, if you know those guys. Extremely. Purpose and scope of the ASHI standards to establish a minimum standard, inspect readily accessible, visually observable installed systems and components listed in the standard. Those systems and components inspected that in the professional judgment of the inspector are not functioning properly, significantly deficient, unsafe, or are at the end of their service or near the end of their service life. So that's the general scope of the ASHI standards. And then, let's see, recommendations. The inspector should make recommendations to correct, monitor for future correction the deficiencies reported in 22B1 or items needing further evaluation, reasoning or explanation as to the nature of the deficiency reported that is not self-evident, and those systems and components designated for inspection of the standard that were not present at the time of inspection, but were present rather, but were not inspected, and a reason as to why they were not. So if you had something there and you didn't inspect it, under ASHI standards, you have to tell them why you didn't inspect it. Again, let's see. repetition. So CREIA standards, definition and scope, they refer partially to the glossary of terms, but also required to inspect components which, in the opinion of the inspector, are safety hazards, not functioning properly, or appear at the end of their service life. And then in the interior section, items to be inspected: permanently installed cooktops, mechanical range vents, ovens, dishwashers, food waste disposals. Oddly enough, it actually doesn't say ranges. Anyway, and then we're not required to light pilots, activate or operate any system component or appliance that is shut down, unsafe to operate, or does not respond to normal user controls. I always tell people I'm in the what is business. I don't care why something doesn't work. It just doesn't work, and somebody else figures out why. Limitations. Every inspection has its limitations. I suggest making sure you tell people clearly what yours are. I always remember Jerry McCarthy, for those of us that remember that old curmudgeon. It's just as important to tell them what you can't see as it is to tell them what you could see. That's one of my favorite Jerryisms. I suggest putting a list of appliances that were present and not tested in your report. I mean, I have appliances not inspected, and it'll say I didn't inspect the countertop stuff. I didn't inspect I don't do refrigerators. I don't do washers and dryers. So it says there's a washer and dryer here. I didn't inspect them. Yes, sir.
I've had one challenge with this forever. How can you tell a client when something is nearly at the end of its life?
I mean, if you see a 30-year-old microwave and it works, then, it's working, but it's near the end of its service life, and
It does or it doesn't.
I know. Yeah. It depends on how you articulate that in the report, I guess. Yeah.
To answer that question, there is a booklet that's out on the internet that has average life expectancy.
Yeah, there's every couple of years there's a life expectancy list published by, I forget who it is, National Association of Home Builders, or somebody does it. Anyway, specifically state that the inspection does not warrant the future functionality, only reflects basic functionality at the time of inspection. That's the way I kind of word it. Is I'm telling you it worked today. I'm not going to tell you it's going to work tomorrow. General stuff, building codes say that appliances must be installed and used in accordance with the listing, labeling, and the manufacturer's installation instructions. So essentially, the instructions for a given appliance are the code. The implications: you can't use commercial stuff in residential. So if you get a range that says this is for commercial use only, and you install it in a residential application, that's actually improper. Because for starters, those big commercial ranges require hellacious clearances to combustibles. They're never designed to go up against a wood cabinet. And I've actually heard insurance guys say that if somebody were to burn down their house by doing something like that, fire started because they had some Viking commercial range in there and the house caught fire, that could actually impact the insurance on the house. Yes, sir.
I was under the impression that you could install a commercial range, but it required a commercial range hood.
The commercial ranges say that this is for commercial use only. And the building code says it has to be installed in accordance with its listing and labeling and the manufacturer's installation instructions. So theoretically, you can't, and if the manufacturer said that this is acceptable in residential or commercial, then you could do that as long as you installed it. But if they say it's commercial only and you're installing it in a Type R occupancy,
is there a tag or a label on the range that would say?
Sometimes they will say commercial only. I mean, it gets hard because some of these Vikings and they're like faux commercial look appliances. Those are designed to go in residential occupancies, but the ones that are actually designed to go in a restaurant are not designed to go in a house. For starters, they're designed to hook up with a flex connector, gas connector, because they want to be able to move them, and they're designed to go up against a wall that's got stainless steel and tile on it, and not have cabinets around it that are wood and things like that. So they got completely different clearance requirements. How old is it? You know, and again, I always make the point to people, you know, you can have something that's really old and still works fine. My wife would argue that that's not necessarily true about me, but the fact that it's old doesn't necessarily mean, I think to Carl's point, you can have a 30-year-old microwave and it still works. So is it really, you know, I mean, I don't know how big a deal that is. The new stuff will always be more energy efficient. And I always make note of that to people. If it's a really old one, I said, you know, it's really old. It may not work for, you know, don't anticipate this hanging around forever. But if you replace it, it's going to be with something more energy efficient. Determining appliance age, if you want to go to that level of detail, is not very easy. The manufacturers, it's worse than some of the water heater manufacturers where you have to have like the decoder ring to figure out their manufacturer date protocol. GE, if it's the second letter and it's an A, B, C, D, E, there's a date code. It's almost like the Bradford White water heater kind of protocol. This will be in the PDF, so you can take a look at that. It's not comprehensive. There's a couple website links that I put in that will give you a place to go for particular manufacturers. Everybody seems to have their own way of doing it. So it's not like a lot of the furnace stuff where it's, you know, week and year or year and week and the serial number. That would be like way too easy. And since engineers can't do anything that's easy, it's convoluted. Here's another GE. That actually sometimes works for Whirlpool and Sears and Maytag and KitchenAid and Roper and Amana and Jenn-Air, Crosley, and others. On ranges, I always, if I can get to it, and I'd say this is probably less than 10% of the time, I always look for the fuel type, especially if I'm in an area where LP is common. I always look to see if it's natural gas or LP on the plate. Very seldom do you actually get to see that because you have to pull the range out to look at it. But I document the fuel type, electric, gas, or whatever, and then and I've actually found, I still remember I did an apartment building one time in San Mateo, of all places, and it was like 20-something units. The wall furnace in one of the units was set up for propane. And it was probably 25, 30 years old. The agent was livid when I first said something about it, and then he realized that that apartment building had been sold probably 12 times over its lifespan, and I was the first person that actually had figured out that appliance was wrong the day it was installed, or that heating system. So always make sure that they're solidly placed, that they don't rock and move around. They should have 4 points of attachment. Verify the function of the burners and grills. For gas burners, I always want to make sure that they hold their flame at the lowest setting, because quite often, especially with some older appliances, if they lose their flame, they don't have an ignition safety device on them, and gas will continue to flow with some of the older stuff, which can be a real safety problem. Electric, damaged, exposed coils. Test the burners in the low first, and then the controller. The controllers on electric coils, often the low end of the coil rheostat will fail first. So go low to high, not high to low. It'll be easier to tell if they're actually working. Induction systems, and I know David just ran into one of these the other day because I figured whether you called me or texted me. Induction systems, if you're in an unoccupied house, you're not going to be able to test it because they require special cookware to activate. You can't just turn on an induction system. It won't heat up without a magnetically sensitive pan on top of it. They're actually designed to not do anything. Even if you put your hand down there and you've got a wedding ring on, they won't turn on because it's not enough metal. Not that you would want to, because it would automatically give you like third-degree burns in your finger. Yes?
I don't want to interrupt you.
No.
On gas ranges,
Yes?
always
Okay.
always.
And what's your rationale on that?
Because so far, there's not a law against hooking the electrical power to the range control to the GFI.
True. It can be on the comment was to check the GFCIs before you check the range, because the ranges and refrigerators actually are allowed to be on the convenience circuits.
The reason is you got to explain to your client
Why the clock?
this situation.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so induction. So in other words, if there's no cookware, you're not going to be able to test.
On that, my sister has the induction cooking element,
Yeah.
and she showed me where she gets, special pans and stuff, but she takes a paper towel and puts it down underneath the pan before she cooks it.
Mhm.
That's what they instructed her to do.
Hmm.
So if anybody's testing that, that's something I have a question.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Two questions. One, if you mentioned that the furnace that was set up with propane, is that you find that on the tag or some?
Yeah.
The
One of the things the manufacturer tags are required to have is the fuel type. So where you see the serial, like if you're looking on a wall furnace, the Williams wall furnaces, it'll actually say natural gas on it. And the same thing's true of a range. You're just probably never going to see the range ones. Sometimes they'll be down on the lower part where you pull out the bottom and it's got the little kind of either broiler or storage area. Sometimes they'll be down there, but most of the time you're not going to see them. If you get access to it, I wouldn't discourage you from taking a look, because it's a second to peruse it. Yeah.
So some of us in here, I've gotten in the habit of trying to take a picture of any of the labels on any of the appliances, mainly because then I can go home, blow it up on the computer and read it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Where at all possible, I scoot out ranges a little bit to look behind them. I can understand why people don't want to do that, but I pull them out just far enough to be able to stick my head in there and see what's behind them, because quite often I find electrical problems. I find, obviously, I can look and see if the anti-tip bracket, that it's not there, because I know it's not going to be there like 99% of the time. It also lets me see if there's covers on any 120 volt outlets, whether there's a gas shutoff back there, if it's a gas appliance, all that kind of stuff. The other thing I always try to do, because how many, I'll raise a hands, how many people have walked away from an inspection and left an oven on? Yes, you will, and I think there's only two kinds of people in here that the ones that raise their hands are being truthful, and the rest of you are either lying or you haven't done enough inspections yet, or you don't remember. So anyway, yes, Carl.
You train yourself for different types of equipment and appliances. When you test the oven, you take the thermometer out, you reach over and shut it off, then you close the door. Do not close the door first.
Yep. For me, I turn the exhaust fan on high when I walk into the kitchen. That exhaust fan is the last thing I turn off. I do not turn off the exhaust fan until I've done everything else. The dishwasher's done, the microwave's been tested. So if that exhaust fan's on, that's my remembrance that something is not finished in that room. Yeah. Anyway.
What I've learned to do is to put my car keys on top of the stove when I'm
So you have to go back for them. Good idea. You're walking to the next inspection, or you're turning the oven off. So anyway, I also, people don't, in our area anyway, people don't cook anymore. They eat out all the time, so quite often I find all kinds of stuff stored in ovens. They're an alternative cabinet. They're not a cooking system. So everything from plastic products to what, anything else, kids' toys, you name it, I found it in there. So I always look before I turn them on, because I don't want to melt anything. Damaged or non-functional coils or burners. I mean, peruse, if it's electric, you'll find damaged coils. There's no sense testing one if it's broken or you can see it's obviously been fried. Again, personally, I never report specific numbers. There's not one of the burners isn't working. It's one or more. There's several burners that don't work. Because, who knows what's going to happen. If two of them are gone, who knows what's going to happen before the repair guy gets there. The exterior, is there any glass tops that are cracked, damaged, missing, defective, worn, illegible, poorly marked knobs, burners, handles, electronic displays on these things often fail. And if you get a failed electronic display, number one, you're good luck trying to figure out how to turn it on. Because a lot of the controls are operated through that display, but also they're really expensive to replace, and quite often someone's going to be better off buying a new range than they are replacing a 15-year-old electronic display if they can even find the parts. Interoperative lights, missing spill guards, loose or damaged any kind of integral venting system components. I note all that. I would encourage you to note all that stuff. Doors, they open and close and seal properly. Any damaged springs, I mean, that door should not, it's like the garage door. It has to have a counterbalance. The range doors actually, and oven doors have a lot of weight to them and mass because of the insulation value. Missing or damaged handles, cracked or damaged glass panels can be a big deal on those because they're hard to replace, expensive to replace. Oven elements, I test broil first, then the bake function. It's because when you turn on bake, quite often both elements come on, so it's easier if you go broil, then just the top one's going to come on, and then when you turn it to bake mode, then you get quite often on some of them, both elements will actually activate. In some cases, only the lower one, but I test bake and broil. I don't know if anybody, I know one guy in our area actually does the self-clean function. I'm not really that into it that I care that much about it. Since most people don't cook anymore, cleaning the oven is a moot point anyway. I try to run the electric ovens with everything on for a while, because sometimes, especially in older houses, you'll kick a breaker. And then other modes you can test at your discretion, but always note, again, the limitations of the inspection. If you're not testing them in all modes, I say specifically I didn't test the cleaning mode, and I only tested it for basic functionality in these two modes. Anti-tip brackets, they've been required since 1991. Between 1980 and 2008, there were actually 53 deaths, I'm sorry, don't have my reading glasses on. About half of those were actually kids. We're talking deaths from anti-tip brackets.
How do you test that you actually tip the stove?
Well, if there's not one there, I know it's not going to work. That's one of the reasons I pull them out a little bit, is to look. And if there's no anti-tip bracket, I'm done, because
It's a matter of seeing the bracket sometimes.
yeah. If it is, I usually pull on the back edge. I don't do the door because I'm afraid I might break it. Yeah, but Sears actually, I mean, in the real world, we all know they're installed like 1 in 100. San Francisco actually, oddly enough, it's like the building officials there finally woke up one morning and read the installation instructions. They actually look for them. So if you're in San Francisco and you do a new construction or a kitchen remodel that's actually was permitted, then there's going to be an anti-tip bracket. What a concept. So Sears actually got sued a few years back over failure. They were charging people to deliver and install ranges to the tune of about 15 million ranges that they'd done this with, and they weren't installing the anti-tip brackets. Well, they were charging people to install the ranges, and they weren't installing them per the manufacturer. So they got sued in a class action lawsuit. Apparently, the settlement actually only covered about 4 million of the ranges, but I guess the clients, if you had one of theirs where you paid to install that, you got $50 or $100 gift card, depending on what it was. And the attorneys split $17 million, so we can see who made out best on that deal. Yes?
The manufacturers now put the responsibility of the anti-tip device on the installer.
Yep. Yep. Well, it's part of the installation instructions. The anti-tip bracket is in the instructions, and what's the building code say? Must be installed in accordance with the listing, labeling, and the manufacturer's installation instructions. So it's actually, theoretically, it's a code violation to not install them. Anyway, if it's got a label like this on the oven door or someplace, then it was required when that oven was sold. And anything after 91, so that covers most of them, because most ranges, newer stuff isn't going to last much more than that anyway. That's where they're commonly installed at. That's the most common installation location I find anyway. Let's see, ranges. I look for clearances issues, especially on high output systems. If you get the big Vikings, these 6-burner things, some of those things are, if you actually read the instructions on them, some of those big ranges are putting out like 180 to 250,000 BTUs. I mean, those are big honking gas-consuming devices. There's one Viking model that requires 42 inches of clearance above the burners, 3.5 feet. So, and again, a big issue with commercial ranges and residential, they just were never intended to go up against wood cabinets, which is what always happens in residential. Here's one of the Viking ones. If you actually could read that, it actually says 42 inches clearance to combustible materials above it. The gas connection, the gas shutoff, same room or area, can't be underneath in the crawl space, can't be in the garage, none of that. Generally behind or adjacent. Increasingly in our area and in the Bay Area, we're seeing jurisdictions interpreting this readily accessible as not being behind the range, but being in the adjacent cabinet or wall area. They actually make them put the valve there, hard pipe it over, come out behind the range, and then put the flex. That would be like San Francisco and San Jose, and a few other big jurisdictions are starting to do that. The reality is, if the range is on fire and you want to shut the gas off, how do you get to the gas if it's behind the unit? And then the big debate is, can the flex go through the cabinet side wall or not? So I don't know what you guys say, but it's almost as much of a controversy as asking this group what's the right way to strap a water heater. We could talk for days about this kind of stuff at chapter meetings. So flex connectors. What does the fuel gas code does not say clearly. It just says follow NFPA 54. NFPA 54 says no connectors through concealed spaces, walls, or partitions. So I guess the question is, do you consider a connector going through a 3/4 inch or a 1 inch cabinet wall to be a partition or to be concealed? It also says it has to be installed in accordance with the manufacturer's listing and labeling. It also says that in there that one connector per appliance, so you can't daisy chain multiple connectors together. The manufacturers also say that. It also says in the codes, the fuel gas code and NFPA 54, the flex has to be installed after the shutoff valve. I actually emailed. I keep my NFPA membership mainly because it's the only way you can go email them and they will answer a question. I emailed them on the issue, and the person in charge of NFPA 54 flex connectors, they get down pretty granular at NFPA, said that it was not their intention to preclude a flex connector going through a cabinet panel as part of that prohibition. However, it's not that simple. Ranges, if we look in the fuel gas code, appliance connections to gas appliances shall be connected to the building piping in accordance with section blah, 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 blah. A listed connector installed in accordance with that standard connector shall be installed in accordance with the manufacturer's installation instructions and shall be in the same room as the appliance. One connector shall be installed for each appliance. Let's see, appliances shall be connected, listed connector installed, let's see, actually it's that repetition of that slide. Let's see, connector tubing shall be installed so as to be protected against physical and thermal damage. Aluminum alloy has to be protected against external, where it can come in contact with detergents or sewage or anything like that. Indoor hose shall be used, let's see, that's lab stuff. Connector shall be a minimum length and shall be a minimum length. So in other words, you want to have the connector be as short as is possible, but it cannot be longer than 6 feet. Connector shall not be concealed and shall not extend from one room to another or pass through a wall, partition, ceiling, or floor. So that's actually the fuel gas code. Let's see. They shall be protected against physical thermal damage. There's actually, they talk about flex connectors in a couple different places. And provided with a gas shutoff valve in a readily accessible location and rigid piping upstream from the flex connector. That's where they deal with that. And then here's what NFPA clarification said. A concealed space in NFPA 54 is an area that is concealed by construction, such as the hollow area inside a wall or area above a drop ceiling. I've never interpreted piping or tubing passing through a floor assembly to a lower level to be a concealed space. That kind of surprised me. I've never considered a cabinet area to be subject to damage, even if it is used for storage. To my knowledge, the National Fuel Gas Code Committee has never received any reports of damage to the appliance connector in these types of installations. So that's from NFPA. The problem is then if you go to the manufacturers, they then re-muddy the waters. So flex connectors, but the manufacturers, Dormont, one of the largest manufacturers, if you look at their instructions, and you can link to it right there, what it says is do not install a gas connector so that it is concealed within or runs through any wall, floor, or other partition. What's an other partition? I don't know. The gas outlet must be in the same room as the appliance so as to be visible for periodic inspection. Never join more than 2 together. Never reuse a connector. That's where it says once you pull it off, you have to throw it away. So the new water heater with a 1970 connector, that's what makes that wrong. Anyway, so the bottom line is kind of have to make a decision because the manufacturers kind of say you shouldn't do it, but they're not really clear on it. And then NFPA says that was never our intent. So you can sit on whichever side of that fence you choose to. I just throw this out there to further confuse and muddy the waters. 220 volt connections, all ranges and other combinations of gas, electric ranges are going to have 220. Anything should be cord and plug connected or have a disconnecting means within line of sight. Older only, the hardwired installations have to allow for movement and service. The newer ones will all ship without a cord, and then their cords are installed on site. I was at a Douglas Hanson seminar, and he actually made an interesting comment, not that it deals with this, but it just kind of popped into my mind, and that is that there's never been a furnace listed for use with a cord. There's no furnaces, so how many times you see plugs and cords attached to furnaces for disconnects? UL has never approved that installation. Anyway, just to further confuse people and whatnot. Yes, sir?
I used to see, talking about the cord where they would have a fuse, coming out of the outlet on the older furnaces,
Yeah, those are SSUs. Yeah, that's for a different reason. That's when the branch circuit has a rating that exceeds the rating of the furnace. So if the furnace said you have to have no more than 10 amp circuit, and you've got it on a 15 amp breaker, then you can put an SSU in with a 10 amp fuse or an 8 amp fuse or whatever it is. Let's see, most ranges have clocks, timers, electronic displays. All of those are 120 volt circuits. So older installations use 3-wire plugs. That's 2 hots and a ground, no neutral. The newer code requires 4-wire plugs that include a neutral, and that's because it allows 120 volt circuits to be properly dealt with in the appliance. And you don't have to, in old appliances, essentially you're bootlegging the neutral. That's, it's almost the opposite of doing the 3-wire plug thing and bootlegging the ground. In an old appliance that has a clock, like an old, almost anything actually that's got a 3-wire plug, the 120 volt is actually always, by definition, improperly wired, because they allow it because it's sort of by convention, but those 120 volt circuits don't have a neutral path, and the neutral always carries some load because the clock is on one leg of that 220, and the power coming in, you're only using that one side, so you've always got return voltage on that unbalanced load. So let's see. This actually was just the wiring instructions for one where it shows actually how you they're telling you to jump the neutral to the ground. 120 volt connections, all gas ranges. Again, 100% of all major newer appliances require grounded plugs. So if you see a range with a 3-wire plug and an adapter on it, or that 120 volt circuit outlet is a 3-wire plug in a 2-wire ungrounded knob and tube or whatever, that's always wrong. The manufacturer's installation instructions make a really big deal, if you read through them, of saying this appliance must be properly grounded. So it's a gas appliance with voltage running through it, so they don't want bad things to happen. Yeah.
With all this new electronic equipment, do any of the manufacturers recommend surge protection?
I haven't seen one on here, but they do say, I pulled down half a dozen different range installation manuals and looked through them. They made a really big deal of making sure that has to be a grounded outlet if you've got a gas appliance, whether it be a cooktop or a gas range, plugged into that 120 volt. It has to be grounded. If it's a 3-wire plug, it needs a 3-wire outlet. Extension cords, not allowed. Extension cords are, the NEC actually defines the use of an extension cord as something that's for a temporary use. Temporary is 6 months or less. So what's the likelihood that range is only going to be, there for 6 months? Anyway, here's actually one that says this appliance must be properly grounded, and that's actually out of one of the instructions. Again, you won't be able to read it here, but you'll see it in the PDF. Cooktops, again, a lot of the same stuff. Document the fuel type if it's available. Ensure that it's properly secured to the countertop. Verify the function of the burners and grills. A lot of the same stuff applies. Again, test the burners on the gas appliances at the low heat setting. Make sure that they hold a flame and it locks. If it's electric, damaged coils or anything, test the burners low first, then high, because the controllers will often fail at the low end first. Induction, same problem with the special cooker. Cooktops, the gas through the cabinets, the same thing for the range. You see it all the time. You decide. I mean, I call them if it's a really small hole, and if it's a really big hole, I don't. But that's just me, and you do what you see fit. 120 volt, again, must be grounded, no extension cords. One thing I'm running into, and I think actually when I did this computer thing, I think I actually lost some photos. I think this isn't the most current version. But the pressure regulator, the little gizmo, that's part of the appliance. So where does that have to be connected to? It has to be connected to the appliance. So we should not see the rigid, the gas valve, the pressure regulator, then the flex. We shouldn't see the valve, flex, the pressure regulator, and another piece of flex. We should see the valve, flex, pressure regulator connected to the appliance. Cooktops, again, almost all of them are 120 or 220 volt rather. If you can see the label, that's great. It's interesting sometimes because a lot of the old, if it's a remodeled kitchen, they often leave the old breakers, and I've seen cooktops where they only required a 20 amp circuit on a brand new, like a little 4-burner, because they're a lot more efficient than the old ones. And here they are protected by a 40 amp circuit that was there 40 years ago. So you've basically got the appliance overfused. So not something you're going to be able to figure out easily most of the time, but if you get something where it's an old house and it's a flip and they've got all the pretty new stuff and you know that they spent absolutely the least amount of time possible doing everything, you can actually run the calculations. If you know how many watts the thing draws, you can actually figure out the amps out of that, and the math is actually pretty simple. The new overconnection device, protection device, is almost never installed. So if it calcs out to needing 20 amps, then it's okay to, there's a 120% calc safety factor that goes in there. Then you go to a 30, but it shouldn't, something that calcs out at 20 shouldn't be protected by a 40 or 50 amp breaker. Cooktops, again, the connections themselves for 120 and 220, they're generally going to be above or adjacent damaged or non-functional coils or burners. Cooktops, any kind of damaged glass, cooktop surfaces, defective, worn buttons, controls. I always worry about people not being able to read and tell what's going on, and more importantly, to be able to tell when something's off. If the labels are all illegible, how do you know for sure? Electronic displays, loose or damaged kind of integral components for I did get some of these. So here we've got rigid pipe. The shutoff valve, I think, was right down here. There's the pressure regulator. Then we go to flex. Oh, here's the valve here, and it comes around. So this is the pipe. That's the shutoff valve. Then we got a piece of flex going to the pressure regulator. This one they used wire ties to connect it, and then they flexed it over. This was like last week. This one was also last week. So here we got the pressure regulator and then the flex. This is actually shipped by the appliance manufacturer, and it's supposed to go right there. Ovens, a lot of the same thing as we saw on ranges: damaged exterior trim, handles, controls, displays, inoperative lights. Yeah, Martin.
Now, are you going to get into anything about clearance from the cooktop to a microwave, the ones that are hanging over the cabinet?
Not so much, because it's almost always driven by the manufacturer. I've actually, every one of those I've looked at, I know what the code says, but what it says is it has to be 18 to combustibles, or what the manufacturer says.
Yeah, so that's where the confusion gets in.
And that's,
the combustible, well, that
yeah.
should microwave.
Yeah, Carl.
It's not confusing when you know before the manufacturer's manual.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the code only says 18 inches if the manufacturer doesn't say, and the manufacturers always say. So it's like a prefab fireplace. It's what the manufacturer says. That's the gospel, and that actually is the code. Oven doors have to close properly. Again, counterbalance springs, gaskets, oven door handles, cracked, damaged glass panels on the front. None of this is rocket science. Test the oven elements. Again, I always recommend looking at the elements visually first, so you don't turn on one. I've run into some where the elements are actually burned. They've actually, arced and they're cut loose, so you know it's not going to work. I test broil, then bake, and I always run them for a while just to make sure that no breakers trip. That's with the exhaust fan running full blast so I don't forget. And then other modes at your suggestion, but again, I would suggest noting the limitations of the inspection report. Gas and 220 connections, those are often not accessible, and I suggest making sure you note if the gas connection is not accessible on a gas oven, or what I see sometimes is the gas cooktop with the electric oven down below, and they've buried the gas connection probably, I mean you assume, because I'm not going to pull out the oven to find out, probably behind there. That's not readily accessible because it requires tools. Gas ovens, the cabinet concern is the same. You know, if you get excited about that stuff, again, I've never seen an instruction on a gas appliance that required 120 volt that did not say, don't put me in an ungrounded situation, and also don't use extension cords. Almost everything says that. So take that for whatever it's worth. Gas shutoff valve accessible. Old ovens and actually old cooktops and old ranges may not have a thermocouple or any kind of pilot safety device. So especially like the old Wedgwoods and stuff like that, there's no pilot safety devices on those things, on a lot of them. So if they lose the pilot, then gas is still flowing. That can be a big deal if somebody doesn't know about that and they turn a light switch on when they walk into the kitchen. 220 on the ovens only. If I can see the ratings and it's not new construction, I actually try to mentally calc out the demand because I'm strange. I'm not suggesting you guys do that because the breakers are often oversized. If it's a flip or a remodel or whatnot, they use whatever was there. Exhaust fans, I like to differentiate if it's a downdraft or just as same with a furnace. I'll say if it's upflow, downflow, horizontal. I'll say the hood is a hood or a downdraft. Any damaged, loose, missing components, missing grease filters. A lot of those, especially in older units, finding missing parts can be actually a really challenging thing. So, if something's incomplete, I would suggest saying it's incomplete and making sure they at least know that there was some stuff missing when you were there. And either ask the sellers if they know where it's at, or to see an appliance guy for availability on parts. Buttons and controls and displays and inoperative lights. I'm having trouble talking. Inoperative warmers or radiant lamps. New construction, anything in fairly recent history has to be vented to the exterior. They do not allow recirculating vent systems in new construction anymore. And I've seen them. Some jurisdictions may require remodels to vent to the exterior. Some may allow it to not. That's going to be a jurisdictional issue as to whether how far they want to push that one. Obviously, some places like condos and stuff, on a remodel, there's no way you're going to the outside on a condo that's in a high rise or buried in the middle of a stack. It's just not going to happen. So usually they cut those people some slack. Oddly enough, exhaust systems actually usually have a maximum BTU rating. So if you've got a little tiny, kind of normal Braun range hood over the top of a Viking, that's probably not going to work. So the range hoods, though, will actually say, this is good for ranges up to this many BTUs. Yes, sir?
It says new construction must be vented to the exterior. How new?
I knew someone was going to ask that. It goes back further than that. I want to say 2010 is sort of the number. But bear in mind, that would deal with when the permit was pulled. So if you could have something that was built in 2010 that was permitted under the 2007 codes that wouldn't take effect yet. But anyway, so they have BTU outputs on the vent hoods, which I didn't realize that until I was researching this. Carl, I'm sure Carl knew that though.
A little bit.
I expected you would have known it, all of
I
it.
was imagining a mobile home exhaust vent with a brand new gas range.
Yep, yep. Yes, sir.
If you have a 36-inch range, 36 or 30-inch exhaust, is that always wrong?
Well, I mean, think of what about the clearances issue? You know, the cabinets are going to be then tucked in, usually, often, unless they trimmed it out. I don't know the answer to that. I honestly, I don't know. I'm pretty anal and I've never thought about that. Maybe you might want to consider a hobby or something. Exhaust system inspections, operate radiant warmers, if any, fans in multiple settings. They often, again, one setting or another might not work. Fans, they can be noisy and still function, so that's not necessarily the end all, but it can also point to other problems like undersized vents and too many bends and things like that can cause them to be noisy. Proximity to other gas appliances and fireplaces, especially if they're in confined spaces. Big exhaust fans can actually have a really big effect. Actually, any exhaust fan can have a big effect on any fireplaces. You can cause a house to go negative pressure in a heartbeat by closing all the windows and doors if it's tight construction and turning that exhaust fan on in the kitchen, and then right across the room over in the family room that's open to, you've got a wood burning fireplace, and you can backdraft that puppy really easily. Even small exhaust fans will actually draw a fair amount of air. CMC, the California Mechanical Code, actually says the impact of exhaust fans must be considered when determining combustion air requirements. In reality, that doesn't happen very often, but think of an exhaust fan in a laundry room with a water heater and furnace sitting next to it, and a door that is fixed and solid, and no outside combustion air coming in, and you're running the fan, the dryer at the same time as the water heater is going because it's using hot water for the clothes washer. You're going to negative pressure that area, and it's going to backdraft. So there is provisions in there that get largely ignored, I think, in reality, but they're still really important. Let's see, the downdraft ones, I always try to run them through the extension, retraction, if they've got them, if they're those type that are mechanical. Quite often those things don't work, or they stick, and if they need repair, some of those things, the decors and stuff like that, they're just horrendously expensive to repair. Electrical connections, many of the manufacturers on exhaust fans allow them to be cord and plug connected, and it's okay that they do that if it's recognized by the manufacturer and part of the listing. Let's see, they shouldn't be cutting extension cords or lamp cords to make appliance cords. They make appliance cords. You can go to Home Depot and there's a place in the appliance section that says these are appliance cords. And the difference is the wires are going to be a much heavier gauge. But you shouldn't see, zip cord or an orange piece of extension cord as an appliance cord on a garbage disposal or exhaust fan or anything. A lot of times you're not going to see all the vent system. I would simply suggest that you say something like, I couldn't see all of it. CMC, the mechanical code, actually says smooth wall vent material. That's the words they use. Some jurisdictions seem to not interpret flex as being a non-smooth material, and they allow it. I checked with SMANC, which is like the Sheet Metal Association of whatever it is. They don't specify, oddly enough, they don't specify whether the male and female orientation on a kitchen exhaust has to be a particular way. So I tried to find something that said that the male end needs to point in the direction of flow like it does on dryers. But there is nothing for just sheet metal ductwork that I could find anyway. If anybody wants to loan me, $500 or $1,000, I'll buy all the standards and actually go through them. But I asked these guys if they had a standard that specified orientation, and they said no, they do not. That the manufacturers might. But then I contacted some of the manufacturers like Deflecto and whatnot, and they said they didn't specifically care. And Deflecto actually manufactures a kitchen exhaust vent kit that includes flex material. So, decide whether I call flex of any kind on a kitchen exhaust all the time because it collects grease. I think what the code's saying is that there's some wiggle room on that, and you may not find jurisdictional support if someone were to call the building official and say, is this okay? They may not say it's wrong, is my point. And I don't know whether you care about that or not, but I think it's good to know that you may not get backed up on the local inspector side. Let's see. What it does say, specifically in 504.2, domestic range vents. Ducts used for domestic range, kitchen ranges, ventilation shall be of metal and shall have a smooth interior surface. Intent is to prevent grease buildup, and vent diameter, I always look at that as to whether it was reduced. In general, it's not all, from doing research on this, when I found them that were reduced, it's not wrong 100% of the time. Some manufacturers of vent hoods do allow the connections to be reduced. If it's reduced, it's always going to be at the connection to the appliance. It's not going to be up in the attic that it gets reduced, though. And it should never be less than the diameter specified by the manufacturer. So if the manufacturer says it's okay to vent with a 4-inch, then it's okay to vent with a 4-inch. If it comes off with a 6, it can't reduce to 4-inch up in the attic, but it could theoretically, if it had a big opening at the base, it could essentially transition from a 6-inch opening or a 3 by whatever, 3.5 by whatever. It could transition to a 4-inch right at the appliance. The only way to know whether that's okay or not, though, is to actually pull the instructions on that vent hood. Yeah, Dan?
The tape that you normally see around those ducting components, is that regulated by the manufacturer and local building authority?
You mean the silver stuff or duct tape?
Well, the duct tape that you see.
Well, duct tape is not actually intended for duct work. I think we all pretty much know that, right? It has to be UL 181A or B, I think, is the spec. Yeah. I don't know that they specifically say, but I think it's going to be the UL stuff. Duct tape is not designed for any kind of. It's designed for, miscellaneous. It's a miscellaneous tape material. It's like drywall screws. Drywall screws are like they're the universal improper connector. They're not designed for decks. They're not designed for earthquake strapping. They're not designed for anything except putting drywall on, but people use them for everything almost but that. Yeah.
Even on this question here, can't you refer back to the manufacturer?
Yeah, absolutely refer to the manufacturers, but I don't remember in looking, because I actually pulled, again, each one of these appliances I pulled down half a dozen installation instructions and started kind of comparing notes. I don't remember them actually saying anything other than seal the joints, using like approved means. And in building code speak, when someone says do this using approved means, that means acceptable to the building official. That's what the word approved means in the building code. Yeah, Dan?
Would any metallized tape then be approved?
It depends on what the building official said. But I think what most of the time what I'm seeing is the metallic peel off UL 181A or B stuff, which is what you would use on any kind of other mechanical system, be it, you know, supply or return duct. Anyway, so let's kind of move along. Garbage disposals, I always recommend looking at them before you turn them on. The same thing we were talking about with some of the other stuff is like the garage doors, don't turn them on and then look at it. The code actually refers to them as grinders. They should have the splash guard, which is that little rubber piece at the drain. That should be intact. The case, check it for corrosion or rust. The cutting chamber, the inside, look for any kind of corrosion, damage on the blades, and that just means pulling back and taking a quick look with a flashlight. Any indications of current or past leakage. A leak at the connection up here where it connects to the sink, that's usually repairable. Anything in the lower third of the unit is not going to be repairable ever, for all intents and purposes. So, unless, of course, it was like a leak at the connection there and here. But anything in the body of the unit in the lower third generally means replace. And is the hex wrench present? A lot of times those are taped onto the side. That's so you can break it loose if it freezes or locks up. Plumbing connections supposed to have that 90-degree turn down. For some reason, the reverse isn't working on this one. Anyway, so dishwasher hose has to be sloped to the disposal. The wall drain has to be below the outlet of the garbage disposal. Otherwise, what's going to happen is the way it's going to work is it's going to be holding water inside the garbage disposal. They're not designed to be a moat. They're designed to be, you know, water pass through them, not to actually hold water. Let's see. And no flex connectors. You know, and I'm talking about the accordion type drain connections that they sell at Home Depot. So they must be okay, right? Because they sell them. They also sell S-traps at Home Depot. Disposal electrical connection, cord and plug, no NM, no homemade cords, no extension cords cut. Has to have a strain relief at the electrical connection, has to be snug. I stick my hand down and wiggle because half the time they're loose. Let's see, switch located in the cabinet. A lot of these things get added on in older homes, and it's like Uncle Buck. I don't know. Anybody remember when the tie had the UBPCA awards in the tie, the Uncle Buck's Proudest Achievements Awards? It's where all the photos got posted of all the weird stuff. But anyway, it was great, and they made us take it out because they said it wasn't very dignified. But it was actually hysterical. It's where people would put all the bizarre, how in the world did someone ever think of that stuff? Anyway, there's always that kind of Uncle Buck wiring underneath these things. Switch on the countertop face is obviously a safety hazard. Someone can bump it when they, you don't want someone with their hand down in the food waste disposal and rubbing a thigh against a switch and turning it on. Some disposals can be hardwired, but it may or may not be allowed in the manufacturer's installation instructions. If it is hardwired, it has to be a disconnect in line of sight. It's an appliance. Air switches, the hoses have to be connected and not damaged. You'll find little vinyl tubing coming down from those. Receptacles, again, they have to be grounded 100% of the time. There is no garbage disposal that allows an ungrounded installation. That would be manufactured in any of this century or the current or the prior one. Polarity, sometimes I don't always do it. I confess I don't do all this 100% of the time. On some stuff, if it's a flip or I see really weird stuff all over the place, then I'm drilling down a lot closer. I mean, it's like you guys. If you reach some level of comfort with whoever was doing the work, then you're probably less likely to peel back as many layers of the onion. So I'll unplug and actually check where possible. Beginning in 2017, so that's January 1st of next year, garbage disposal, and the dishwasher also have to be ground fault protected. So my suggestion is start talking about it now as an upgrade, so that when you start telling people it's wrong, it's not the first time they ever heard it. So, yes?
I was in the electrical industry for 30 years, and there was a problem with ground fault circuit interrupters because of nuisance tripping.
That's a long time ago.
All the GFIs have changed.
Actually, they changed, I want to say in like 2007, and then again, just like last year, the new stuff is so good that if the freezer trips the ground fault in the and it's a new ground fault, trips the ground fault in the garage, the odds are greater that it's a problem with the freezer than there are that it's a problem with a ground fault protector. In garages today, the outlet has to be for the door opener has to be ground fault protected, and they will not trip. If it's a new opener or a newer opener, they won't trip the ground faults. The reset point for the door openers has to be readily accessible, so it can't be on the ceiling. It has to be on the wall or someplace you can get to. But the old problems with GFCIs, gone. And I use that as an excuse to tell people, you know, these are older ground faults here. The new stuff is way better. I suggest you replace all your ground faults with new stuff, just blanketly.
So any of the old ground faults won't be available in the stores?
No, you can't. UL changed the standard, and all ground faults sold have to meet whatever that standard is. So you will not find you should not be able to find a ground fault manufactured in 2005 in the stores today. There was actually two different times. I think one of them was either 06 or 07, and that improved the performance. Yeah, anything older than 10 years can be problematic. But if you remember, ASHI did that study on GFCIs back, God, it's got to be 10 or 15 years ago. I think that study ended up showing that something like 22% of all GFCIs, at that point they were looking at all the older stuff, were faulty. They would not trip under fault conditions. So the new stuff is just so much better. You know, saws won't trip them, refrigerators won't trip them, motor starts won't trip them, garage doors won't trip them, and if they do trip, it really is probably a problem with the appliance, not the ground fault. Anyway, so but think about it in a matter of 8 months, 7 to 8 months, all outlets in what they did is they removed the exception, like even a laundry sink. If you've got a laundry sink with a ground fault above and a non-ground fault below for whatever reason, under the new code, the one under the sink is going to be required to be ground fault protected because it's within 6 feet of that. There's no exemptions on any of that. There's no obstruction exemptions or anything. So anything within 6 feet of that kitchen sink that's a 120 volt outlet that's even if it's for an appliance circuit, is going to have to be ground fault protected. And probably the code cycle after that, they're also going to have to be arc fault protected. Yeah, so we just actually went through, Douglas Hansen did a talk for Silicon Valley, a toolbox, talking about sort of what's in the pipeline coming. And the reality is that in a couple, 3 code cycles, essentially every non-220 circuit in that house is going to have to be arc fault and ground fault protected.
Now, this is all for new builds.
It's all, and it'll start to impact residential remodels too. Today, right now, if somebody goes out to the store and says, I want to change that outlet over there in my house, guess what? You have to arc fault protect the circuit that's on. Okay, how many times do you think that happens? So I've got a comment that says, you know what, it looks like some of the outlets have been replaced. They're not arc fault protected. Somebody ought to check and find out what happened here and get an electrician to do it. I don't make a big deal of it, but the reality is if you change an outlet in a residential occupancy for the last year, I think it's about a year, that circuit that receptacle is on has to be arc fault protected. It can be done with an arc fault receptacle, or it can be done with a breaker, but that circuit has to be arc fault protected.
Anything that gets, okay, so everybody gets it now, period.
Yeah, and think of how many times you go into a house that the realtor's getting ready to put on the market, and they go through and paint it, and what do the painters do? They put on all new receptacles, right? Because those old ones look ugly. They put the new Lutrons in or something. Guess what? As soon as they change that out, arc fault. Of course, how many times does that happen? Maybe, I don't know, once in the state? Anyway, so we got to get going. Testing, I run water, look for leaks, cycle it on and off a couple times. I look for lights to flickering in the area, verify that the blades are actually rotating and that it's not just making noise. I look for excessive noise, and they can be noisy and still work fine. Sometimes they'll freeze. That may be just because of lack of use. I toggle the on-off and try to see if I can get them to kick loose. And if they can't, then note it as such. Let's see. Small units are generally noisier by nature because they don't have as much sound insulation. Stainless steel sinks are inherently noisier than cast. SOPs require reporting things that are approaching end of life. So I have a comment that I stick in that says it worked, but it's old, and think about upgrading, but don't expect it to last forever if you don't. Nicer than that, but basically. Appliances, so we get to dishwashers, exterior, interior, point of contact. Do they rock? Are they connected to the countertop? Quite often they forgot the one or two of the screws, and they actually can tip over just like a range. Missing, damaged panels, trim, kick, handles, are the latches on the doors functional, open and close properly, springs on the doors, just like oven doors, have to be counterbalanced. Interior case corroded, indications of any leakage. If something's really old and it's got drip marks down below it, is it really worth turning that thing on to find out if it really does still leak and it's a 30-year-old dishwasher? Let's see, door gasket, because that's going to be one of the places that want to leak. Any damage, stains or damage adjacent that would give you a clue that it is leaking or has leaked. Rusting, racks, are they present? Do they move? Damaged, rusted. Spray bars, are they damaged? Do they move or rotate? Put a finger on them and spin them. And then people like to use dishwashers for storage. I found bread and stuff in them and everything else under the sun.
See bread.
Yep. But somebody had bread. Really? I don't know. Let's see. Same thing. Let's see. Electrical cord and plug can be adjacent or behind. That rule is also changing. In the next code cycle, they'll no longer allow the plug to be behind the dishwasher. It'll have to be in the adjacent cabinet, so it's readily accessible. Right now, if you think about it, it's just accessible. Readily accessible means you don't have to use a tool. So to get at the dishwasher, you have to undo the two screws and pull it out. As soon as you pull out the tool, it's no longer readily accessible. So they changed it from accessible to readily accessible in the next code cycle. And that's that's January 1, 2017. 2017. So right now, the California codes, we're under the 2013, which becomes effective January 1, 2014. So it's always the year after. So right now, they just published the California codes, the 2016 codes. They take effect January 1 of the following year, so January 1, 2017. The jurisdictions have 180 days to to adopt, assuming they don't want to make changes. And if they don't adopt within 180 days, which is 6 months, then they automatically take effect. So some of these rules, if a jurisdiction, they don't have to automatically adopt them January 1, but that's when they actually take effect in the codes. So you could see a jurisdiction locally still working under the 2013 code up to and including, you know, the middle of next year. And at that point, if they didn't adopt, then it's adopted for them by the state, is what it comes down to. So I think most jurisdictions now, they adopt them so they take effect January 1 to keep it simple. How many places around here in SAC, how many cities actually do any kind of jurisdictional amendments? Do you know? There's a process where the jurisdiction can actually amend parts of the code, but it has to be done through a local ordinance that's passed by the city council. So you can see some of that happening as well. So, and again, they have to be GFCI protected as of January 1. Receptacles have to be grounded, have to be correct polarity. The cord has to be either from the manufacturer or a type approved by the manufacturer. You may see some hardwired from time to time. It would be the manufacturer that would say right or wrong on that. And in any case, there has to be, if it is a hardwired dishwasher, it has to have a disconnect line of sight. Let's see. This is just from Fisher-Paykel. Grounding instructions. This appliance must be connected to a grounded metal permanent wiring system, or equipment grounding conductor must be run with the circuit conductor and connected to the equipment grounding terminal or lead on the appliance. They all say something like that. So no ungrounded stuff with dishwashers. Water supply, again, accessible. I always wonder, you know, if the faucet hot-cold is reversed, what do you think happened with the dishwasher? So same thing's true of laundry equipment. If the laundry sink has hot-cold reversed and you're coming off of those connections for your washer-dryer, that means when someone says, I want cold only, they're probably getting hot only. Because the system isn't smart enough to know that. It's just basically left is supposed to be hot, right's supposed to be cold. Yes?
Something just hit me about the reversed hot and cold. When looking at a clothes washer, if you reached in and touched the left side, the left hose, would it be warmer?
If you were running it, yeah. I don't run yeah. They wouldn't necessarily. I don't run clothes washers either. But if it were running, yeah, but think about it. If they reverse the faucet, the chances are they might have done the same thing to the connections, and you might want to give someone a heads up, even if you're not testing them. Hose condition. I always recommend upgrading all laundry hoses to stainless steel. The manufacturers on the black stuff will say replace them every 5 years. And also, interestingly enough, if you read the fine print on the black hoses, they usually say turn the water off when you're not using the appliance. Yeah. So what do you think the odds are that somebody actually did that? Drain connection, kink damaged, enough to allow the appliance to be removed without disconnecting. And again, we're going to get into the air gap or no air gap discussion, which is almost as controversial as the gas connection through side panels. Almost all dishwashers today, for the last probably, I don't know, couple decades, have some sort of built-in check valve that prevents water from re-entering the appliance. So there's some arguments out there in our jurisdictions that allow manufacturers like Miele and Fisher-Paykel to hook up without an air gap because they'll say ours has one in it. It doesn't really have an air gap. It has a check valve, which is not the same thing. So I guess are they required or not? And the California Plumbing Code, what it says is domestic dishwashing machines shall, meaning that's not optional, it shall discharge indirectly through an air gap fitting in accordance with section 807.4 in a waste receptor or a Y branch fitting on the tailpiece of the kitchen sink or a dishwasher connection to a food waste grinder. It also says in And here, no dishwasher drain shall be connected to a sink, tailpiece, continuous waste, or trap on the discharge side of a food waste disposal. So what that means is if you have a garbage disposal, it has to drain into the garbage disposal. It cannot drain into the tailpiece on the sink. If it doesn't have a garbage disposal, then it can drain into the tailpiece. But if a disposal's there, it has to connect to the disposal. It also says no dishwashing machine shall be connected to a drainage system or food waste system without the use of an improved dishwasher air gap on the side of the dishwashing machine. Listed air gaps shall be installed with the flood level marking at or above the flood level of the sink or drain board, whichever is higher. That's not optional. That says shall. So it says no dishwashing machine. So none. Having said that, jurisdictions will, through jurisdictional exception, sometimes allow them. So I know this is what the code says. The real world, the building officials do pretty much what they want, but the code actually says they don't have the right to do whatever they want. One second. So what about, like Mealy says, don't put air gaps on. I've actually had Mealy repair guys say, you can't put an air gap on ours because it will damage the system. I don't know. You tell me. My take on that is that Mealy doesn't have the right to circumvent the plumbing code. And the same, and let's take a quick look at Fisher Paykel and GE. So in Mealy, the machine comes equipped with a built-in non-return valve on the discharge side, blah, 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 blah. The hose must always be attached on the sink side of the P-trap. So they don't want an air gap in there on a Mealy. I guess the question is, do they take precedence over the plumbing code? My personal feeling is no, they don't. The jurisdictional inspectors may allow it. So there's always some, gray areas. This is kind of one of them. I would submit to you what happens if the kitchen's remodeled and they put in a Mealy and they don't put in an air gap, and the next people come along and they decide they want a GE. What's the odds that the air gap's going to get installed? Yeah, Carl.
We all have conversations with our agents. Well, this doesn't mean an air gap because it's so-and-so. Refer to manufacturer's recommendation and your local building.
Yeah, the manufacturer's installation instructions will say usually install per what we say and in accordance with local codes. Mealy doesn't say that, though. I've looked at their instructions. So a local jurisdiction can amend the California Plumbing Code to allow that. However, it has to be done by the City Council, has to be filed with the Building Standards Commission at the code cycle change, and it will be listed at the Building Standards Commission website. So I've yet to...
You say good luck.
Yeah, and I know. So, and I was going to get to that. So that's what the building code says is an approved way to modify the building codes, whether it be plumbing or mechanical or electrical, and it will be published. The jurisdiction can also approve something under alternative methods and materials if they deem it to be equivalent. However, the request for an exception has to be made in writing. So that would mean every time you install the dishwasher, you'd have to send the jurisdictional letter and say, I'm installing a Mealy, are you going to let me do it without an air gap? Again, the chances of that happening are zero. There can be no blanket exception, so the jurisdiction can't arbitrarily say, and I say they can't, I mean the building code says they can't, I know they do. They can't just arbitrarily say we're not going to enforce that provision of the code. That's actually a violation of the building code. We know in the real world it doesn't work that way. They do pretty much what they want. That's what the building code, that's what the plumbing code says. The plumbing code says it's not a discussion point. It will be there. Dishwashers, on the Fisher Paykel, we've all seen these 2-drawer things. One little word of caution I got from somebody I was talking to about doing this presentation is don't open the doors on these when they're, don't try to open the doors on them when they're locked, because you you can open them. You will damage the lock mechanism, and it costs about $300 or $400 to repair. And it says right in the instructions, under no circumstances should you open the drawer whilst the dishwasher is in operation. Always, whilst. That's a cut and paste. Always press the button to pause and wait until you hear the 4 additional beeps before opening the drawer. So if you don't want to spend $400 to fix somebody's fancy, schmancy dishwasher, these have actually the highest repair rate, breakage rate of any appliance like known to mankind almost. They're very expensive and they're very finicky. If you don't want to be spending $300 or $400 to repair one because you damaged the lock, then wait. Dishwashers other than, this is actually in Mealy, so I just found it kind of interesting. So if the drain connection is less than 8 inches off the floor, not the cabinet, but the floor, the drain must be vented, and then they give instructions on how the drain hose has to be vented. So even Mealy has some requirements on where, when you need to vent things and whatnot. GE, actually, I installed one, and I found it kind of interesting because you go to, most states allow high loops, in lieu of an air gap. GE actually says if the drain connection is less than 18 inches off the floor, the drain must use an air gap above the flood rim of the sink. So even in their instructions, they say that if the drain is down low, that you still have to use an air gap and that a high loop is not acceptable. So there's exceptions to everything is the point I was trying to make.
Well, on that last slide about the melee, you got to be at least 8 inches off the ground. Well, all the drains are way down at the bottom of the dishwasher, so if that...
No, this is the drain connection to the wall.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. And this is to prevent floor siphoning out of the unit. So back to the point about they have the check valves, so we don't need air gaps. So if that's the case, how does the water go? How does it siphon the water out and cause problems if we really have this fancy smancy check valve thing? Anyway, I put that in there simply because I thought it was interesting that even where you think that you know what's going on, the manufacturers sometimes have different takes on things. Like I didn't realize that about our, I was putting in our GE, whatever it was, monogram dishwasher, and actually read the instructions before I did it. And here's the diagram. So if that's less than 18 inches, that's the connection to the tailpiece. If you're doing a high loop, it has to be at least 18 inches to that connection, and the 32 inches off the floor to the top of the high loop. Otherwise, you have to put an air gap in. Yeah, Dan.
In your own reporting, Skip, if you want to give us the information, do you have a standardized comment on this, or
On air gaps?
On air gaps, or is it specific to the manufacturer?
I just have one. I just say I do have one. It says this is a newer dishwasher. Some manufacturers, I'd say some, even knowing that it's all, have built-in backflow prevention devices built in, or check valves. The California Plumbing Code still requires air gaps. See the jurisdiction. Kind of in a nutshell. Yes.
So the high loop, that is.
That's not allowed in California.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah. No. I'm just saying, even in an area where high loop is allowed, GE still doesn't allow it under certain circumstances, which I thought was kind of interesting because I thought it would be sort of either is or it's not, and they're saying, yeah, maybe. Microwaves, again, damage, poorly marked controls, displays, in-off lights, wall connection. Is it secure? I mean, if they're a wall or a under cabinet mounted, is it secure? Damage to the case, trim missing, damage defective controls, the turntable and racks, are they complete? Is it to have a turntable? If if it's got the little thing in the center, then it's got to have the turntable. Any racks missing, displays readable, not readable, doors closed, damaged handles, door cracked, any damage. If you got a microwave with a damaged glass panel, then you're probably buying a new microwave because they're really not safe to use if they're not sealed properly. Some people use the cup of water or damp towel to test. You just run it long enough to make sure it heats. I use a microcheck, which is a little acrylic thing that flashes. Clients think it's cool that it flashes when it lights up. It's also faster, a little faster, and has a little bit of cool factor to it. I place my hand next to them when they're running. If my hand gets warm, not touching the microwave, then it's leaking because microwaves don't give off heat; they give off radiation. Radio RF, and try opening the door when it's running. It should shut down. Older units may not do that. That's a microcheck actually lighting up. Refrigerators, SOPs don't require inspection. I disclaim them personally. If you elect to, again, level, do they rock? Doors should open and close by themselves and stay open, not swing shut. And if they're partially open, they shouldn't swing open, meaning they'd be out of level. Damaged handles, gaskets, controls, improper or damaged electrical connections. I typically try to look for the electrical connections and the plumbing if there is any. If it has a 3-prong outlet, it has to be grounded. Again, a lot of these have water in them, and they, electricity and water don't coexist really well. Any signs of leaks, water shutoff valves often at the sink, and so there's this convoluted water connection thing to be concerned about. Excessive signs of condensation, either inside or outside. Let me we're getting behind schedule here, so I want to try to keep going. Indications of compressor function problems, unusual noise or vibration, stains around the appliance, ice dispensers. One thing I actually pulled up some how to inspect, what common problems with refrigerators, and one of them was a home inspector actually said check the size of the ice cubes to make sure they're the same as the dispenser. You don't want the homeowner, like, it doesn't work, so I'm just going to dump some ice in there so they think it works. So anyway, so someone doesn't like fake you out and you say the dispenser looks like it's working when in fact they just took a bag of ice from 7-Eleven and dumped it in there. Again, clothes washers and dryers not required to be inspected. You can disclaim. I always take the tack that the connections get inspected. If there's water and drain and a source for a dryer, if there's a source of power or fuel for a dryer, there must be a dryer vent. So it actually says that in the code. If there's a provision for a dryer, then you have to vent. Clothes washer, again, condition, mechanical damage, drum damage, 4 points of contact shouldn't rock, should be level. Doors should open and close properly and seal properly, no damaged glass. Electrical plumbing connections, again, grounded only. I always suggest replacement of the hoses because the black ones are only good for 5 years. And again, they actually say in the fine print on them, I found it one time, it says, you should turn the water off when you're not using this appliance. I just don't think that ever happens in the real world. Dryers, same kind of thing. Open and close, electronic displays. 220 connections for dryers. Again, same problem. If it's a 3-wire and the dryer has any kind of electronic displays or whatnot, there's 120 volt in there, and that means that they bootleg the neutral off the ground connection. And let's see, be the same kind of stuff as the range. All new code stuff requires 4-wire in laundry. They don't allow any provision for 3-wire in new construction. Gas connections, same room or area. Flex connector, one only, no more than 6 feet. Has to be where it's, the shutoff has to be readily accessible or accessible. 120 volt, I look for the cord to make sure if I can see behind it, not damaged, outlet grounded, And if it's within 6 feet of a sink, regardless of whether it's behind the appliance or not, it must be GFCI protected under new codes. So, and this goes back, I want to say it's like either 2007 or 2010. So anything fairly new, ground fault only behind, you know, if they moved their laundry, relocated it, new construction, even behind the dryer has to be ground fault protected if it's within that 6-foot zone from the sink. Dryer fires, top 10 cause of home fires in the United States. Improper installation and lack of maintenance are the number one causes. The manufacturers actually, not only do they require that the vent be properly maintained, but usually the manufacturer's instructions on the dryers require that the homeowner remove the side panels on an annual basis and clean the inside of the dryer. I can tell you from personal experience, never happened in my house unless the thing was getting serviced. But I actually had read, I did an article for CREIA back, I don't know, probably 6 years ago on dryer venting. And I actually had found an article on dryer fires where homeowners insurance had denied coverage on a dryer fire where the dryer had not been properly maintained. So has to vent to the exterior where a dryer hookup exists unless a condensing dryer is installed. Condensing ones are the ones where they actually don't need vents. They use almost like a little radiator with cold water going through it to take the moisture vapor out, and then a filter to remove the lint. Very slow. The water-filled canister vents are not recognized by the California Mechanical Code or any model code, not the I codes, not the uniform codes. They're not acceptable for dryer venting. They sell a ton of them at Home Depot and Lowe's, not to pick on Home Depot, but big box stores. Yes?
What's the maximum length that vent hose?
6. And guess what? They come as 8 foot. It's called a transition duct. And the maximum length is 6 feet in California because that's what's in the uniform codes. If you go to the international codes, it's 8 feet. So since most of the United States uses the I codes, they're all 8 feet, which means that if they take them out of the box and just plug it in, it's wrong by default because it's an 8-foot extension flex transition duct. So those canister vents also say electric only. So they're not allowed for gas ever, even under the manufacturer's instructions, which are telling people to do stuff that they're not supposed to do because they're not allowed to be installed anyway. The gas dryers, the vent is the combustion byproduct vent. So it's the flue. Mechanical code, terminate at the outside of the building, equipped with a backdraft damper, no screens, not connected or installed with sheet metal screws or fasteners that will obstruct flow, not connected to gas connectors or vents or chimneys. Let's see, moisture duct under positive pressure shall not extend through ducts or plenums. So you should not see a gas, any kind of dryer vent rather, go through the return plenum or a supply duct on a heating and cooling system. See that all the time, right? I mean, because they're usually sitting next to each other. And actually, oddly enough, too, not oddly enough, but you're not allowed to have gas pipes go through supplier return ducts. So let's see. Where a compartment or space for a domestic clothes dryer is provided, not less than a 4-inch diameter moisture duct of approved material has to be installed. Where a closet designed for the installation of a dryer is installed, you have to have 100 square inches of what's called make-up air provided by doors or other approved means. So you should never have a small enclosure for a dryer with a fixed front door and no kind of vents because it'll go negative air pressure. Dryers, the typical domestic dryer discharges 200 cubic feet of air per minute to the exterior. So there has to be a way for new air to get in. Otherwise, if you really sealed it and it goes really negative air pressure, what happens is the dryer overheats. And if there's any gas appliances in there, it'll start backdrafting those. Smooth surface. Let's see. The transition duct, which is the flex, not more than 6 feet, permitted to be used in connection with domestic dryers. It actually has to be listed now, so you can't have the old white stuff is no longer approved. Even the plastic flex, some of that stuff, it actually has to be specifically UL listed as what's called a dryer transition duct. Length limitations, 14 feet. That includes two 90-degree elbows, a length of 2 feet deducted for each additional. So if you had a dryer duct, they allow one and another one, and then you get 14 feet. If you put another 90 in there, then you're a maximum of 12. If you put another 90, you're a maximum of 10. And the transition duct does not count to that. Let's see, exterior, we're terminate with a backdraft damper, minimum of 100 square inches of makeup air, smooth interior wall, minimum 4-inch diameter, max length 14 feet, includes, this is like just a summary of what the code says. Other lengths allowed by the dryer manufacturer and approved by the AHJ. So you can have a dryer vent longer than that as long as the dryer that's being installed says it's okay for 25 feet. You can have a 25-foot dryer. It has to be actually approved by the building official before you can install it in that situation, though. But then what happens when the dryer gets replaced with one that's only good for 20? You know, so not a perfect world. No screws or fasteners into the airflow. May not connect or pass through a duct or a plenum. Transition duct, 6 feet max length, not concealed in construction, and must be listed. So that's the dryer venting kind of synopsis. Specialty stuff, I disclaim all this stuff, but you know, there's so many different things out there. Fruit dryers I've seen, you know, for actually making dried fruit in kitchens, and all kinds of other overpriced toys that people with too much money seem to want to buy. I inspect or disclaim, you can inspect or disclaim at your choice. I disclaim all that stuff personally, but if you're going to test it, make sure you look at the manufacturer's installation instructions. Trash compactors, we still see those. They were all the rage back in the day. Now they're recycling bins usually, but they're noisy, and I would argue even if you hit the button and they make noise, you don't really know if that's cycling, and you don't know what the compaction rate is. So anyway, so that's it for appliances, and we're at 11:30, which is a little behind schedule. When was lunch scheduled?
It'll be close to noon.
Okay, so I'm going to get started on the next one, and just give me 1 second. If you guys want to get up and use the restroom real quick.